The House settlement has ushered in a brand new era of college athletics and college football, but it is merely the first step on a long journey ahead. Evan Stewart's injury has left a hole in Oregon's offense. Can the Ducks still remain lethal in the passing attack in 2025? There are lots of Big Ten quarterback questions, and some of the answers to those questions might determine what this conference looks like in December. We are dialed in and always faster, much faster than dial-up, here on this edition of Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Look around, and you're going to have to continue to look a lot harder for that sanctity, for that pureness of college football and college athletics from days gone by, because those days are over. Welcome to the business that is college athletics. Welcome to the big business era that is college football. We are now in a brand new era that is centered around the almighty dollar, and we are open about it, and we are upfront about it here specifically on this very show. Welcome. It is Wednesday, June 10th, 2025. Welcome in to Big Nation. I am your host, Big Ten Ted. And now there are all sorts of adjustments going on behind the scenes after last week's approval of the House versus the NCAA settlement, and that is exactly where I want to start our show here today. Now, fair disclaimer, something that I want to get out into the open immediately right here, right now. You guys know, I think, where my expertise, if you want to call it that, expertise certainly lies. It's about the game of football. It's about the X's and the O's. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes. It's about the 11 on 11. Had to talk to some folks offline about this, get some questions clarified, get some questions answered, certainly a little bit. Had to take in a decent amount of publications to really kind of know what exactly are some of the main issues and some of the main talking points that I think we need to talk about as it pertains to this future era of college athletics, and maybe what could be some of the future issues surrounding what came out of this settlement. Now, I think you guys all know the details of the settlement. You know all about roster limits. You know all about rev sharing. Looks like football is going to be between $13 and $15 million every single year from a rev sharing standpoint. You know, we know all of these things. We know the College Sports Commission is really going to take over the issues that the House versus NCAA settlement really brought forth, because we know the NCAA is losing its power. We know the NCAA is going to be a shell of itself. Like, the NCAA is still going to be around. They're still going to run volleyball tournaments. They're still going to run basketball tournaments, which will probably continue to be certainly one of their biggest things. It is now. They're still going to do that. They're still going to make rules, right? Whether we like it or not, they're going to adjust they're going to have the targeting rule. They're going to have these 2-minute timeouts. Like, those are some things that they are still going to do. But when it comes to like this financial piece, when it comes to the things surrounding the settlement, that's where the College Sports Commission is going to take over. And it's about damn time. It's about damn time that we have someone that's going to come in and enforce these kinds of rules. That's the first thing. And it's about damn time that the NCAA loses, a large chunk of power. I think those are some of the really big talking points that we have coming out of this. But really, the first point that I want to make sure that I make crystal clear, this is a step in the right direction. But this is not a finality, right? It might be the final step of this of the House versus the NCAA lawsuit. It might be the conclusion of that case, But now this is really just the beginning of a brand new era in college athletics. It is only a step. And we're right at the conclusion and the beginning, certainly at the same time. And one thing that I hope that this new era brings, now that everything is out into the open, I mean, we kind of knew through these last handful of years with NIL, like we knew, like, yeah, kids were making a lot of money, and we knew the financial piece really had a factor in some of these decisions, whether it came to a high school recruitment, whether it pertains to a transfer recruitment or whatever type of player acquisition process you were going through. But it was just not something people were very comfortable talking about, whether it was from coaches, whether it was from the administrative level, whether it was from the player level, because it still had a stigma. It still had that old school stigma. I really hope that this new era of college football, this new era of college sports, this new era of college athletics, that we are all more comfortable talking about money as a primary factor on maybe why a player goes to one school or another and why a player enters the transfer portal or something like that. Because like even in today's day and age, in this like recruiting cycle, we're in one of the biggest recruiting months of the year here in officials visit season in June. You have people still saying he's out there chasing a bag. Well, when it's legal, you would do the exact same thing. When you go to a new job, you probably don't take less money. We are all looking out for our own self-interest. We are all looking out for our best financial interest, and that is the case for these kids. You don't come down on an NFL player for taking the biggest money offer. You should not come down on a player, a college player, for doing the exact same thing. So I hope like this old school money is bad type of mindset does not carry over. And I think like we have a lot of reprogramming to do, I think, in our minds as college sports fans and as college football fans, because I think we're just so used to a certain era and what's good and what's bad. And now we've got to reprogram that and maybe have our minds a lot more like the business type of minds like they have in professional sports, like they have in the National Football League. Okay, so I say it's only a step. Ted, what makes you say this is only a step? Because I think the rev sharing, right off the bat, look, there's nothing to really combat with that. They're going to increase 4% every year for the next 2 years, and then they're going to reevaluate on a 3-year period and all of that. I don't think that's going to change drastically. Maybe we could get some type of contracts in the future, but I'll kind of get to that a little bit with what this next thing is. I think like the biggest bullet point that came out of this that could cause maybe the biggest upheaval in the near future or the distant future is NIL Go, which is the NIL clearinghouse. Now, I'm not going to go into an insane amount of depth on what exactly the NIL Go and NIL clearinghouse certainly is. You make over $600, right? Any NIL deal over $600 has to go through this filtration system where they have to make sure that, hey, what your deal is a true NIL deal. It is fair market value based on like the size of your market, but that's not only right. That's not the only factor. It's the size and the influence of the program in which you are at, because like there's programs around college football that are in smaller markets, but certainly have a big and wide reach and certainly draw in a lot of money and have a lot of brand power certainly as well. So they take in a lot of these factors and they say, yep, okay, this checks out, you can earn that money, or no, it checks out, we're going to block this deal. Now, listen to the last sentence I said. That is not legal, okay? A lot of people out there that I trust, a lot of people I think that are in the know with this and has said, okay, there are going to be lawsuits as it pertains to this NIL clearinghouse in the future. As soon as you have a marquee player that has a deal blocked through this NIL clearinghouse, there is going to be a very popular lawsuit. And then as soon as that happens, and then another one happens, and then another one happens, what happens when there's a bunch of litigation? What happens when there's a bunch of lawsuits stacked up against this? Is it like in some of these other states, when lawsuits were filed, whether it was with the transfer portal or whether it was with NIL. Do those rules just basically become unchained and now we're back to the wild, wild west? How exactly does that happen? I think these are all things that has to be figured out. Like another big thing, why I say this is only a step, because even in a perfect world, there's still things that we have to figure out before this football season kicks off in late August and early July. Now, with this clearinghouse and with potential lawsuits certainly on the horizon, I think one big factor is how strict is this clearinghouse going to be? Where is the line? What precedent are they going to set right out of the gate? Is this going to be a deal where they let 97 to 98% of these things go through and it's not going to be a huge deal? But hey, if one of those 2 to 3% is a pretty sizable player, and that could certainly get a lot of attention, and that could certainly kind of sway things back in another direction. But is it only like the crazy and egregious deals that are going to be blocked, or is it going to be like 10%, 15%, 20%, 30%? Like, what is going to be, where's the line that is going to be drawn? I think that's going to determine exactly maybe how early we could see some type of lawsuits against this, because let's call it as it is. Put your biases aside. Like, there's no clearinghouse for Aaron Rodgers when he wants to do a State Farm ad. There's no clearinghouse when any NFL player wants to do an ad or some type of endorsement on their own, right? We're talking about the free market value of a player to earn what he or she feels that they can really earn, right? It's kind of, that's their own power. That's their freedom. That is their right to be able to do so. And this clearinghouse maybe sort of limits that maybe a little bit. I think and kind of going off of getting to more the competitive side of this, I think there are smaller schools out there, even smaller schools in the Big Ten, that are saying, well, if this NIL Go clearinghouse really reins in a lot of these big spenders, the playing field is going to be leveled a lot more. And then you have the Washingtons, the Minnesotas, and teams like that. Some of these mid-tier teams that, hey, maybe we can rise up. We can maybe make the playoff a lot more often. We can contend in the Big Ten a lot more often. If everybody is on a level playing field, if this NIL Go clearinghouse is maybe a lot more strict. And I think it's very clear. There's been some teams around college football that are taking advantage, I think, of this previous era leading up to this deadline as well. So this is going to it's going to shift a good amount. I don't know how much it's going to change in the near future. I don't think all of a sudden that you're going to see Northwestern bringing in a top 25 class, something like that. So, but who knows? Who knows? Roster construction is going to be very different. Roster construction, I think, is going to be very unique. But I think if you still comes down to a level playing field, I still think it comes down to, does your team win? Does your team produce NFL draft picks? Does your team provide a competitive financial structure? Right? I think still the top players want to go to the top schools where they are going to be developed into their future. I still think that is important. I just don't think all of a sudden that the top 60 schools are all of a sudden going to be in contention for top 10 recruiting classes. I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to see some of these maybe lower tier and lower level schools maybe invest a lot more money into a singular player or maybe a singular class or a group of players, or whether it's in the portal or high school recruiting or something like that. But I just, in the near future, I don't know how much it's going to change. You got a lot of people out there throwing out this group of team as winners, this group of team as losers with this settlement. It's silly. It's silly because there's so much about this settlement that we don't know. We don't know. Like I said, the clearinghouse could be very flexible and only block egregious deals, and you still could have the big spenders and the big brands in college football. They can still swing it around on the NIL side, and they're going to still be able to outspend some of these other teams in their own conferences and other teams in other conferences throughout college football. We just don't know. So people out there that are kind of predicting that this school or that school is going to have success or they're going to fail, it's way too early to know that. It's way too early to certainly predict that kind of thing. Roster construction. This is where things get fun because I'm going to be so intrigued because right now we have the most unique era of roster construction. In a previous era, it was, well, you got to recruit good high school players. All right. And, the teams that are able to recruit great high school players year in and year out, those are the teams that are going to be great year in and year out, and you got to be able to develop those players. And that was pretty much it, right? When you had to sit out a year to transfer. And now you kind of you get into this NIL and portal era that we've been living in the last handful of years. It's been about retention. It's been, portal has been something that people have built their rosters on as well. Now there's a few more different ways. Now, I think with this era, there's going to be a lot more different ways. Where are you going to invest your money? Right, that $13 to $15 million in rev share money. You put it right in the middle. Let's put it at $14 million. That's $133,000 per player on a 105-man roster, which we know that is going to be the roster limit, certainly going forward on the football side. So how are you going to spend your money? I think that is going to be like, we talk about general managers, we talk about capologists in professional sports. You're going to be able to see that. That's what needs to be able to happen. You need somebody in this front office. I talked about at the beginning how college athletics is turning into a more professional model. You need people you need multiple bodies in the front office to be able to handle this side of thing, of course, so the coaches can do their jobs to the best of their ability as well. But I think there's going to be teams that are going to spend a lot of money to be able to retain players. If they're trying to a junior-laden team, a senior-laden team, we got an experienced team. If we bring these 10, 15, 20 guys back, we're going to be a really good team. But on the back end of that, maybe we won't spend as much money on recruiting. Maybe we won't spend as much money on portal. So maybe there could be a little bit of a drop-off after this. That's why NIL is so important. That's why this clearinghouse is so important, because how much money, extra money, are teams going to be able to spend on a year-by-year basis? Now, if I'm a mid-tier team in the Big Ten, and all of a sudden I've got $14 million to play with, whether it's a portal guy or whether it's a recruit, if I really want a player, if I'm the Purdue Boilermakers, and I've got a generational quarterback in the state of Indiana, and I don't want him to go to Ohio State, and I don't want him to go to Michigan. I don't want him to go to USC. I don't want him to go to a school like that. I want to keep him in state. You can shell out that money, whereas before, maybe your NIL didn't allow you to do that. So I think the rev share certainly allows smaller schools to maybe be a little bit more competitive in some of these acquisitions in high school recruiting or in the transfer portal as well. But how are these coaches, these front offices, these GMs going to spend their money year in and year out, especially the smaller schools that maybe don't have as much from an NIL standpoint? That's going to be fascinating, exactly how they structure and move around the cap and move around with their NIL funding and exactly what they have. That's what makes this intriguing to me. The part I loved about professional sports and love about professional sports is working around the cap, is dancing around the cap. Well, if we keep this player, if we sign this quarterback, if we sign Brock Purdy to a huge deal, hey, maybe we got to cut some players on this side. Where do you put your resources? Where do you put your priorities? That is going to be at the forefront of roster construction and roster building for college football programs going forward. It is all about adapt or die. We talked about before which teams are better prepared, which teams are worse prepared. I think the teams that were ready for this, the teams that were ready to adapt, I think are going to be the ones that, at least right away, are going to appear to be more successful. But now you've seen other schools that are really starting to dive into this game a little bit more. Iowa recently hired Scott Pioli as their general manager. He's got an NFL background as well. So you're going to see, I think, a lot more news over this next month of teams really starting to build their front offices a little bit. We've seen reports of Penn State and UCLA going out there and maybe doing some private equity. Not a huge fan of that. But hey, whatever you got to do to be able to bring in more money, to be able to spend, to be able to remain competitive. Things are going to get very creative. They're going to get very creative. It's going to be an action-packed next couple of months, but it's certainly going to be fun to follow. Welcome to the first step of the new age of college football. All right, now it's time to talk some football. Let's head out to the West Coast in Eugene, Oregon. The Oregon Ducks, I think, are in a situation where they are expecting to be in a Big Ten championship. They are expecting to be in a college football playoff, that type of 10-plus win type of discussion every single year. And coming off of a year where they went 12-0 in the regular season, winning the Big Ten championship before losing in the quarterfinals to the Ohio State Buckeyes, a fantastic season. And I think as you look forward to this 2025 season, I think a big reason specifically offensively why they believe that this was going to be another great season was because of one of the bigger producers at the wide receiver position was slated to come back and play a big role. Emphasize was. Late last week on Friday, we learned that wide receiver Evan Stewart suffered what appears to be a torn patella tendon in his knee. Timetable was 3 to 12 months. Sounds like it was just like a freak deal on a 7-on-7 drill. And your heart breaks certainly for Evan Stewart right now because, man, this was supposed to be his bridge year. This was supposed to be his bridge year to the NFL draft. He's had really good production, whether it's at Texas A&M or this last year at Oregon. He's been in that 400, 500, 600, yard type of range. And I think this year was the year that Evan was really slated to break out to be a 1,000-yard receiver on this team. And it appears that is not going to be the case, obviously, this season. Now, he's kind of dealt with some injuries in the past. During the Rose Bowl, he was not available. I believe that was due to a back injury during spring practice. I believe it was a separate injury that he had. He didn't play in the spring game. It was kind of held out a little bit during practice, and then you've got this injury. So now all of a sudden these injuries are stacking up. So if you look at maybe his NFL future, that might be a little bit of a question mark. So you could see Evan Stewart use his redshirt this year and then come back for the 2026 season. Now, ask a lot of people around Oregon circles. That 2026 season is one that got circled as maybe they're going to turn the 0 into a 1. Maybe make a run for their first national title. And that was a year where you were slated to not have Evan Stewart. I know when you have a knee injury, especially a guy that really emphasizes his cutting ability and his speed as much as Evan does, it can usually slow down a guy. It's guys maybe aren't usually the same. But if you can get a pretty good version of Evan Stewart for 2026, along with maybe a second-year starting quarterback in Dante Moore, DeCorian Moore, and maybe some of these other guys coming back to make a run towards a chip, now you have Evan on that team. Hey, it's a little bit of positivity. It may be a negative situation. It's a little bit of a silver lining, I think, as it stands right now. But the big question is, what's next? Okay, it happened. It sucks. He was slated to be really one of your big-time playmakers on this Ducks offense this year, but now Oregon has to look to the future. I think now expectations turn into pressure for the Super Frosh DeCorian Moore, the number one wide receiver in the 2025 class that Oregon was able to get. One of the highest-rated recruits, maybe the highest-rated recruit that Oregon has ever gotten. Certainly the best wide receiver talent that they've really ever brought in to that program. Because DeCorian he was expected to be in that wide receiver 2 type of role at the very least. Maybe he'd work his way up to wide receiver 1 as the season went on. But you had Evan Stewart on the other side. Right, so there was expectation for him to be really good, considering, and then people looked at what Ryan Williams did last year. They looked what Jeremiah Smith did last year, and they were expecting to maybe DeCorian Moore to continue in that type of trend. Now, all of a sudden, without a proven commodity like Evan Stewart on the other side, now all of a sudden expectations turn into pressure. Now you got to be the number one guy from day one. I think with Stewart on the other side, there was a period where it's hey, he can kind of mold into this offense and mold into what his role specifically is going to be. Now it's hey, you got to be that guy. You got to be that dude from day number 1. And he could very well be that guy from day number 1. And this could be kind of a non-point. And maybe this was going to be DeCorian Moore's year anyway. Maybe this was going to be the year where he was really going to step up and show the world exactly that hype is true. But now he's certainly going to be on that island out there. There's going to be a lot more pressure on him. And we'll see what's on the other side of him, because coming into spring, that wide receiver 3 battle was wide open. It was wide open for the Oregon Ducks. Now it's wide receiver 2. Now it's wide receiver 3. I'm kind of trying to trend some positivity here for the Duck faithful right now. I think if there is a little bit of a silver lining, it's the timing of this happening in June as opposed to happening halfway through fall camp, because now I think the coaching staff can evaluate. They can evaluate what they saw in spring. They can evaluate who really stepped up, who really has an opportunity to play alongside DeCorian Moore and really make this offense as good as it can be, certainly. Another guy to certainly keep an eye on is one of my favorite tight ends in college football. It's Kenyon Sadiq. Kenyon Sadiq is a fantastic football player. He can play out wide. He can play in the slot. He can play at the traditional tight end position. He's a unicorn. He's extremely athletic. I think you're going to see a lot more targets come his way. Whereas maybe before he'd be like a number 3 option, now he's going to be like a number 1 or a number 2 option, I think, on a lot of plays. I think that they're going to get a lot more diverse, certainly with him. I think we could see him split out wide, whether it's in the slot or near the boundary, a lot more than I think was previously thought last year. So, like, there are still, I mean, it's Oregon. Like, when you have a program like this, it's if you fancy yourself a championship level program, you got to have that next man up mentality. You got to say, hey, we've recruited extremely well. There are guys that can step up into these roles, and I believe that there are guys that are going to step up into these roles. But Evan Stewart was maybe expected to be a 1,000-yard receiver. I don't think one guy is going to all of a sudden pop in and be a 1,000-yard receiver at the wide receiver position. It might be a couple of guys. Now, one guy that I really have my eye on is a former 5-star himself, is Jurion Dickey. Now, he's dealt with some injury issues. He's dealt with maybe some weight issues as well. That's been thrown around. But I think a reset in the wide receiver room at the wide receiver coach, new wide receivers coach Ross Douglas, coming into this team, I think is going to help him. I was able to kind of talk to somebody that had their eyeballs on spring practice. They said Jurion Dickey looked like he was well on his way to kind of being a new guy. Looked like he was well on his way to having the best spring that he's ever had so far. And now if they can get him to getting close to realizing that 5-star potential, realizing that 5-star ceiling, all of a sudden that makes things a lot better. Oregon, I believe, is going to be, because Evan Stewart was a veteran option of sorts in that room. I think you're really going to lean on veterans Gary Bryant Jr., who in the Bo Nix season in 2023, I think he had over 500 yards receiving that year and was a decent-sized part to that offense that year. Big game against Arizona State that specific season. About Justice Lowe, a guy who came in the absence of guys like when Tez Johnson was out, when Trayshawn Holden was out last season. I think these veterans are going to be asked to step into a bigger role. And then, like, Malik Benson, a transfer from by way of Alabama and Florida State. Okay? Like, this is a guy that was formerly the number 1 junior college player in the country. Like, now this is his opportunity to really step up into a big-time role for this Oregon offense right now. Like, and then you go like a Jeremiah McClellan, who was like a 4-star, top 150 player in the class a couple of years ago, certainly. Kyler Casper has been waiting in the wings. Like, there is a lot of players. There's a lot of players in this room, but they need, like, 2 players to really take a big-time step forward. There is enough depth in this room for them to be lethal. But I think that this room needs to be, I think it already was going to be deeper, but I think it needs to be a lot deeper. You need more guys that you can rely on in key spots to be able to go out there and make plays. I can't wait to see what this Oregon offense truly, truly looks like in 2025. When we are looking back at the Michigan Wolverines, when we're sitting, prior to the game in late November, or maybe we're sitting there in the postseason in December, we are going to remember the month of September. Because, man, I believe that first month of the season for the Maize and Blue, I believe that is going to really set the tone of what Michigan football is going to be the rest of the season, for multiple reasons. I believe this team, they fancy themselves as a college football playoff team. And getting out to a good start is going to be ultra important to their success eventually down the road. What do we know? To get to the college football playoff, you probably got to get 10 wins. We don't really have a data point, certainly, for a 9-3 team to be able to get in. Michigan, and we'll talk about these road games, but they've got 2 difficult road games in the months of September that I think is going to reveal a lot. Before we get into that, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the signal caller position. I want to talk about the quarterback position, because what kind of happened last year? What was really something that was a detriment to really the beginning of the season for Michigan is the quarterback battle. They kept on switching back and forth. Alex Orji, Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle, like all of those guys were in there. And, the situation was not great, considering maybe how late in the process that Jim Harbaugh and J.J. McCarthy kind of went off and went to the NFL, and all of those decisions were made. And maybe Michigan didn't have the greatest opportunity to go out there and find somebody. So it was kind of a tough situation that Sharon Moore and this coaching staff were really put in. But now, like this year, the quarterback talent is leaps and bounds better. But I think they got to learn their lesson from last year. You can't let this quarterback battle linger, especially considering the type of matchups, these type of non-conference games, the big non-conference game that you have on the road, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, and then a big conference game, the first conference game of the year, towards the end of September as well. So I think that this talent, I think it's going to make this decision maybe a little bit easier. Whereas last year you had a bunch of guys that were mid. Let's just call it as it is. Let's call a spade. And they were trying to get situational with like the speed and the athleticism of someone like Alex Orji, and maybe that was going to pay off. But I think you have guys in Mikey Keene and Bryce Underwood that I think are true good to really good to maybe great type of quarterback options, I think, for Michigan this season. Like, not only for the confidence of your team, but also for the confidence of the guy. Like, you don't want to get into a situation where you're sitting there in the middle of the Oklahoma game wanting to make a change. Like, you want to be confident. You want, especially if it's the young guy, especially if it's the true freshman Bryce Underwood. That is the last thing you want from a true freshman, right, is to put your confidence in them early and then maybe realize it wasn't the right decision and we put them out there too soon. That can maybe deter the development of a young quarterback certainly a little bit more. So you need to be firm, make your decision. And I will say this, if you want to split reps in that first game against New Mexico, be my guest. Do so. Use that as an opportunity, a game situation, although against not a great opponent, but use that as a game situation to really figure out who's going to be the best going into that big game against Oklahoma just a little bit later. So they got to be able to figure that out. That is a tremendously important key to really getting that quarterback established in September so they can gain confidence throughout October, throughout November, so they can be playing their best. If you're doing a flip-flop job, neither one of those guys is really going to be able to gain a ton of confidence, to be honest with you. Let's talk about these road tests, because really when we talk about the months of September, the road game, the second game of the year, where they go on the road to play the SEC's Oklahoma Sooners, and then their fourth game of the season at the end of September, they go on the road in a conference game to face off against the Nebraska Cornhuskers. I believe both of these games are going to reveal a lot whether, hey, is Michigan truly a college football playoff team? Are they a top 20 team? Are they a top 15 team? Where exactly do they sit in the grand scheme of things? Or do they have a lot of work to do? Like, remember last year's team, for as maybe as bad as they were at times, especially earlier on in the season, this is a team that, that they had NFL players. They had Colston Loveland. They had Kenneth Grant. They had Mason Graham. For part of the season, they had Will Johnson. Now you don't have those types of NFL talent to lean on. I think this is going to reveal a lot about this coaching staff, how they have this new crop of guys really ready to play and really to step into bigger roles to be successful right away. Let's start first about what this Oklahoma game could possibly reveal. Like, all Brent Venables does is crap out great defenses. I mean, he just, whether it was at Clemson or now here at Oklahoma or wherever he has been in his career, he's constantly put out fantastic defenses. I think he's one of the better defensive minds maybe out there in college football. And this defense for Oklahoma is no different. The Sooners returned their top 2 sack guys from last year, Armason Thomas and Grayson Halton. They combined for 15 sacks last year. This is a pretty good and a decently deep defensive line. I think one question mark that I think Michigan fans have this year that I think is really important to the success on offense, not only in the pass game protecting their quarterbacks, but also in the run game paving the way for guys like Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall, is the offensive line. The offensive line was hit or miss, certainly at times last season. Early in the season, there were a fair amount of misses. But how is this offensive line going to come together in just their second game of the season against a really, really good SEC defensive line? And then how is Bryce Underwood, if he is the quarterback or if it's Mikey Keene, but especially if it's Bryce Underwood, which that's kind of the direction that I seem to be trending right now in Michigan's quarterback battle. But if it is him, how does a young quarterback handle this type of environment? How does a young quarterback go into a night atmosphere in Norman, Oklahoma, face not only the pressure of the pass rush, but also the pressure of the moment, but also the pressure of the environment? Because if you're playing Bryce throughout the season, he's going to have, even though the schedule is very manageable for Michigan, he is going to have bigger stages. He is going to have bigger moments where he needs to step up. This is going to give us an early glimpse and an early reveal as to how ready or not ready Bryce Underwood may be. So this offensive line is a huge key. This is an offensive line, I think, that needs to take a step up this year. We know Greg Crippen, we know Giovanni El-Hadi, guys that were on this team last year that are in the middle of that offensive line that are expected to maybe take another step forward in their development. This is going to reveal a lot. That is going to really be a big test to really see where this team really is. And I think, on a larger macro scale, both of these road games are really going to tell, is Michigan prepared to really step back into that playoff atmosphere? Or is this a team, maybe minus some of these NFL guys, that it's a little bit unprepared for them to really rise up to that level? That's what this is really going to say. And then you look at the offensive side of the ball for Oklahoma. This was a bad offense last year. Let's just call it as it is for both these teams, but I'm talking about Oklahoma right now. But they go out and get John Mateer, great transfer quarterback from Washington State, one of the top-rated transfer quarterbacks this cycle. Now, they had some injuries at wide receiver last year. Former Purdue Boilermaker Deion Burks was kind of banged up for most of the season. Jaden Gibson as well. They bring in Giovanni Gibson, who had over 1,200 yards in the FCS last year. So if you keep those guys healthy and then you add Giovanni Gibson, like I said, this is a group of weapons that I think could be pretty decent. And what do we know about Michigan's defense last year? The pass defense maybe wasn't up to snuff. We know we had Rod Moore go down in the beginning of the season. Will Johnson, of course, was banged up throughout the year. So you had some of these, whether they were newer transfers or just newer players in general, they had to step up maybe a little bit earlier than anticipated into some of these roles. And you certainly saw some of those growing pains for the Michigan defense. Will the secondary continue to have those same issues against a team that I think will be better throwing the football down the field? That's going to be something I think is going to be revealed. That's something that I think we're going to really find out in this football game. I think that this is going to be one of the more physical non-conference football games that a Big Ten team will probably play. I could see this one being 20-16, 20-13 type of defensive football game. How can this offense really adjust? Hey, we're going to find that out. And then, hey, how can new offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey be able to adjust early in the season? We're going to find a lot of questions are going to be answered very early in the season. And then you advance forward to that first non-conference game. Nebraska's a team that's likely going to be 3-0 if they can get by Cincinnati out of Arrowhead in the first game of the season. And they're going to be looking at home for that first marquee signature win for Matt Rule. Nebraska's going to be sick of saying, hey, when you get in these situations, they always come up short. Matt Rule, hey, you can't beat a ranked team. They're going to be sick of hearing things like that. And I think Matt Rule is going to be looking hard at this Oklahoma film. And he is going to be looking for everything to be able to dissect, to be able to find an advantage. I think Nebraska's, there's a possibility that the Huskers' passing attack could be pretty good this year. If Dylan Raiola, 5-star talent, if he really takes that freshman to sophomore year of development with Dana Holgerson and a full off season to form that relationship with Dana. They went into the portal and they got some pretty good options over there at wide receiver. Guys like Isaiah Hunter, guys like Dane Key coming over from Kentucky, and then you kind of round it up with guys that are already there. They've got some pretty good options at receiver. So if we see Michigan's secondary maybe not quite up to snuff against Oklahoma, you got to think Nebraska is going to take advantage of that. Like, if they go 2-2 through this stretch, that puts a lot more pressure on them. Like, could they run the table? I mean, you got Ohio State at the end of the year, but they've had pretty good luck with the Buckeyes, certainly, and that game's going to be at the Big House this year. Like, could you run the table? Yeah, you could, but you've also got games in the middle of the season. You got, like, at USC is in there. That's not going to be easy. Washington, I think, could give teams around the Big Ten a lot of fits this season. At Michigan State. That's a rivalry game that is far from guaranteed. Sparty is a team where I could see them maybe being at times a little bit scary if they can really put the pieces together, if Jonathan Smith can kind of do that this season as well. So, man, if they're able to kind of, like, imagine, we talked about 2-2 and how much pressure that puts on them in the back half of the season to run the table and get to the college football playoff. What about on the back half of this? I know I'm maybe talking a little bit negatively, but what about the positive side of thing? What if they go into Oklahoma? What if they smash? What if they do what they do and they win a physical football game? What if they, beat a Nebraska by 10 or 13 points? I probably right now think Michigan is probably, as a whole, offense, defense, special teams, is probably a little bit better than Nebraska as we sit right now. So, like, what if they're out of that stretch at 4-0? Now, all of a sudden, we're really looking at Michigan in an extremely positive light. And they're sitting there, maybe in that top 15 conversation, getting closer to that top 12 type of conversation at that point in time. And it puts less pressure on some of these other games that I talked about in the middle of the season than approaching that, of course, that big Ohio State game towards the end of the season, certainly as well. But we haven't talked about the elephant in the room. We haven't talked about the elephant in the room as it pertains to the month of September. And that's Sharon Moore and the status of Sharon Moore. Right now, Michigan has walked through the cafeteria line. And they said, I want Sharon Moore to be suspended for Game 3. And I want Sharon Moore to be suspended for Game 4. They have picked and chosen which games that they want to have their self-imposed suspension be enacted for. Which I think is I'm not the biggest fan of that. Let me just put it that way. I think it's a little bit of hubris, if I must say so myself, personally. Because they want him to coach the Oklahoma game. They view the Oklahoma game as a big game. They want to go in there. They want to win that game, and plus that's Sharon Moore's alma mater, and I'm sure he really wants to coach that game. Right, and the more I kind of hear out of this NCAA investigation, the more it could be more than just a slap on the wrist. And the NCAA could view that 2-game self-imposed suspension as like, I don't know if that's enough. I don't think that's enough. The NCAA getting dragged through the mud, especially with all this settlement stuff and taking away a lot of the power from the NCAA. Everybody says they're a joke. They are a joke, but everybody's saying they're a joke. Maybe this is their chance to make a statement. Maybe this is their time to maybe make a comeback, and maybe Michigan is just that team that they want to send a message to right now. And maybe, what if Sharon Moore is suspended for the first 4 games of the season in September? How does Michigan as a team really circle the wagons? Like, I thought Sharon Moore did a really good job in the absence of Jim Harbaugh's suspension. Okay? Does Sharon Moore have a Sharon Moore? And we know the coordinators, Chip Lindsey, we know Wink Martindale. Are they guys that, because sometimes in these types of road games, it can come down to a coaching decision. It can come down to a personnel type of decision as well. Like, it can come down to a lot of these kind of things that swing one way or another in a very small window within a football game. Does Michigan have a guy that can really take on that game day responsibility and allow them to get that to be able to get over the hump and to be able to get wins in those types of football games as well? And then when Sharon Moore, if he comes back during the middle of the season, right, is there time for him to really get acclimated without having some of those non-conference games to really get his feet under him as well? So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration, because that could provide a little bit of a bumpy road as well throughout the month of September. I strongly believe that this month of September is really going to tell us what direction Michigan football is going to go in 2025. When we look at Big Ten quarterbacks this year, everybody's kind of putting the more experienced guys at the top of these quarterback rankings, but man, there is a lot. And I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position for some of these Big Ten football teams, and that is what makes this fun. That is what makes this freaking unpredictable, and this is why I freaking love it. There are like four big questions that I have as it pertains to Big Ten quarterbacks. And I think like the answers to some of these questions could really determine what this conference really looks like in December. Who's maybe getting into the college football playoff? Who's getting into the Big Ten championship race, right? Which team is taking a 2, 3, 4 game type of jump forward? Who is the surprise team in the Big Ten? I think some of these quarterback questions that are answered could really determine what this thing looks like in December. Let's dive into some of these questions certainly right now. Let's start first at a couple of places that have extremely high expectations year in and year out for their quarterbacks. We're talking about the defending Big Ten champion Oregon Ducks, and we're talking about the defending national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. Let's start first in Columbus, Ohio. Now, I know there is a quarterback, you got Lincoln Kienholz, but it's likely to be Julian Sayin, 5-star guy that can absolutely spin it. He was originally an Alabama signee and commitment, but when Nick Saban retired, he was kind of this short-term transfer that went over to Ohio State last year, and he was on this team and kind of learned behind Will Howard and those guys last season as well. Look, I feel like I could be close to a Heisman finalist if I'm throwing the ball to number 4. If I got Jeremiah Smith on my team, if I got Carnell Tate on my team, I got Brandon Innis on my team. Ohio State is wide receiver U. They are undoubtedly wide receiver U for a reason. It just makes life so much easier for the quarterback, doesn't it? When you can throw the ball in the midst of Jeremiah Smith and he can just go up there with one hand and make a crazy catch, right? It makes life picture perfect. And then don't forget about the great pass-catching tight end that they brought in out of Purdue, and that being Max Clare. Like, there are weapons all over the field. I think when you look last year when Chip Kelly was coordinating this offense, this was an offense I think that was more really based on the run game. And they had great receivers, no doubt about it. But, with Will Howard and his running ability, with, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, both now NFL running backs, I think that's really what really fit them kind of best. But I think this year it's really going to pivot maybe back to what we're used to seeing at Ohio State, is really being that lethal passing attack and that team that can really hit the home run ball certainly over the top. Like if you're Julian Sayin, you got all of these weapons. It's Ohio State. There's already going to be crazy amount of expectations. You're coming off of a national championship. Like, you don't want to be the guy where you dip down to 10-2, you dip down to 9-3. Like, you don't want to be that guy at the quarterback position. And Brian Hartline coming in as the new offensive coordinator, I think, like, Coach Hartline and Sayin, they need to just put him in a position to succeed, specifically early in the season. I think Julian Sayin is talented enough that once we get to the middle of the season, he's going to be slinging it. And this Ohio State passing offense could be one of the best in college football, could be one of the most lethal in college football. But here's the thing. Julian doesn't exactly get some of these preseason G5 or FCS games that other schools are getting. He gets one of the best teams in college football. Now, it is at home at the Horseshoe, but still, he's got to play the Texas Longhorns right off the bat. So that is going to be a good barometer. That's going to be a good test to really see where this passing offense is, to really see where Julian Sayin is. I'm very curious to see where he really lands on the spectrum with this group this season. I think they've got the potential to be one of the best passing offenses in college football, but we're talking new coordinator that's never really called plays before, and we're talking about a new quarterback. So despite maybe the talent that you have out there on the outside, there is a fair amount of question marks, but they just need to put him in a good position to succeed, and he's talented enough to really make this engine hum, right? He's got the keys to the Corvette, and I think he's got the talent to certainly keep it on the road, and that's really all he really needs to do with the talent that he has around him. Let's talk about Dante Moore over at Oregon. Both of these guys maybe started at other schools, but they had this last year to kind of sit, to be able to learn, to be able to kind of take in things from their coaching staff, to be able to take in and really learn from veteran quarterbacks. We talk about Will Howard and how much he played. How about learning from Dylan Gabriel, the guy who's played the most college football out of anybody, right, in the history of college football, playing over there at UCF in Oklahoma. So Dante was, I think, that's a great situation to be in, being able to learn from like a coordinator like Will Stein and being able to like de-UCLA himself by taking time to mature and develop. And that takes a lot of maturity. It takes a lot of honesty of where you really sit in your career, I think, to be able to do that at Oregon. Now, this is a little bit of a different scenario at Oregon as it pertains to Ohio State. Oregon has had back-to-back quarterbacks as Heisman finalists. 2023, Bo Nix, of course, and he played a lot of football as well. And then Dylan Gabriel. Will Stein is so used to playing and coordinating, calling plays for extremely intelligent and extremely cerebral and extremely experienced football players that have seen a lot. Dante Moore was in and out of the lineup his freshman year at UCLA. He had some highs, he had some lows. But overall, it certainly wasn't a great experience. Now, this is really the first time that this Oregon staff is kind of dealing with a little bit of a younger quarterback that's not ultra experienced. That is, I think, a little bit of a new challenge, and maybe it's a little bit of an unknown. Now, I have all the confidence in the world that Will Stein's going to be able to do his thing. Like, Dante is an extremely talented quarterback. I think he's got the highest ceiling probably of an Oregon quarterback yet we've seen. Yeah, I know. They have a Heisman Trophy winner in 2014 in Marcus Mariota. They've got Justin Herbert. What do we got? Bo Nix. We talk about Dylan Gabriel. Like, we talk about all these guys. But Dante Moore's arm talent is just different. He's just different. They've just got to find a way to eliminate that bad decision-making that he made at UCLA. And, Oregon's offense is very, take what's there, get it into the hands of the playmakers, short to medium passing concepts, and just, high efficiency, high completion rate type of stuff. But I really think that they want to take advantage of the arm strength that he can really zip it down the field as well. So this is going to be very interesting because I think Oregon has an extremely high ceiling this year, despite the injury to Evan Stewart, because of the talent that Dante Moore certainly has. High expectations in Columbus and Eugene for both of these new quarterbacks. Ain't no doubt about that. Let's talk about the guys that a lot of people put at the top of these Big Ten quarterback power rankings. The experienced guys. And I think both guys are quarterbacking teams where it's they're here and they want to jump to that next level. Penn State's Drew Aller, Illinois' Luke Altmaier. Penn State wants to jump to a national championship type of level. They've been hanging at 10-2. They want to jump up to that next level and really be in that conversation. And then you look at Illinois, Luke Altmaier, right? This is a guy that's started at Ole Miss, played a couple of years here at Illinois, and now he's looking to take this team, the Illinois Fighting Illini. Remember Lovie Smith? Remember Tim Beckman? Yeah, that program, he's looking to take them to that next level and get to the college freaking football playoff this season. So the question for these guys that needs to be answered, can they carry their teams to that next level? I think a big question for Illinois is, with the loss of Pat Bryant, one of the Big Ten's best receivers last year, who steps up? Who steps up? They've got Hudson Clement transferring in from West Virginia. Hank Beatty is a name that's been thrown out there. Malik Elzy. There's names that have been thrown out there for the Illini, but someone needs to be able to step up. Does Luke Altmaier make these guys better? Penn State is bringing in some very good transfer wide receivers this season. Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, Trevor Pena coming in from Syracuse. Drew, I think, just needs to be more consistently great. We've seen him be great in some games. You look at the Big Ten championship game last year, he made some big-time throws, and he felt like he was matching the moment in that type of game. But can he consistently do that? Because, look at last year against Ohio State. I mean, and there's been some other games where, he just kind of folds up a little bit. That USC game last year was really, really good. You need that more consistently week in and week out from Drew. You can't have these games where he kind of goes into a shell a little bit. A couple of years ago, I said, man, you get Drew off schedule and it kind of goes downhill a little bit. I thought he did better this past year when the pocket breaks down, when things get off schedule a little bit, but he's got to take it to that next level. Drew has got to play like a first-round draft pick if they want to be in that national championship conversation, certainly. Now, this next one I'm a lot more liberal on what it actually means. Which second-year savior rises to the occasion? It could be their second year on campus. It could be their second year as a starter. But, man, there's a group of guys. Once you get beyond really those four guys that I talked about already, once you get to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that group, there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of guys I think that could rise to the occasion. And then I think whoever rises to the occasion for their respective team, I think that team has the potential to possibly be a breakthrough or a surprise football team. Like Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. We've all seen his high school tape from Buford, Georgia. We all saw kind of the flashes last season. Now with Dana Holgers, look at that Wisconsin game. That's, I think, what Nebraska truly can be. I've talked about it before where I think they've got a very manageable schedule. No doubt about that. They've got a very manageable schedule this season. If Dylan takes that big step up that we think that he can take, that could be something that could finally vault Nebraska into a pretty significant conversation. I'm not maybe ready to say playoff conversation quite yet, but into that 8 or 9 maybe win type of category as well. Damon Williams, he's a very trendy and a very sexy pick right now to really be a breakthrough quarterback. This will be his second year at UW. He kind of started towards the end of the season. Will Rogers was there last year, and you saw more of Damon as the season started. He's so exciting. He's going to be so exciting to watch. He's going to be able to lean on a 1,000-yard rusher in Jonah Coleman. He's going to be able to lean on a great returning receiver in Denzel Boston. You got Amari Evans transferring in from Penn State as well. I'm really excited what he can be because that's a Washington team that could be a little bit pesky as well. They've got a schedule that's not terrible. It's not terrible. It's not the best, but it's not terrible. And man, if Damon really steps up into a big time role, we've seen what Jed Fish can do from offenses and the type of elevation that they can take year in and year out. And we saw what happened at Arizona. If that happens this year at Washington, I think that they could give a lot of teams on their schedule fits this season. Drake Lindsey at Minnesota is very interesting. He's got that typical pro-style NFL type of body, something like 6'5", 225, 230 pounds. I love Minnesota. I think Minnesota's got a great team. I think they got a good defense. I think they got a really good run game. I think they got good receivers. They went into the portal, did really well. Guys like Javon Tracy, guys like Logan Lawyer from UCLA out of the slot, even someone like Malachi Coleman, who was highly recruited. He was a former Nebraska Cornhusker. I think they got good receivers. They got a good run game. He's got good stuff around him. He's got a very good team around him. I'm curious to see just what level Drake is playing at. Minnesota fans really like him. Okay, he was kind of like a 3-star recruit. Did some services have him as a low 4-star guy? But Minnesota clearly is investing into him, and they're clearly very confident in him. They went and got Zach Pyron, I think, as an insurance policy in the transfer portal. But I think they believe in what he can be. And if he can be good, I don't think he's definitely not going to hit his ceiling, I think, throughout his career. This year, I think the best is yet to come for maybe Drake Lindsey. But man, if you start to see it middle of the season, you start to see him develop, this could be a Minnesota team that I think could be really, really good this season. Aiden Childs is another one. We know it will be his second year as a starter at Michigan State, his third year in college football. Michigan State, another team that doesn't have a terrible schedule. Aiden, they're hoping that he got that turnover bug out of his system certainly last season, and that's a team that I'm I would keep an eye on them. If that Joe Rossi defense takes a step up, we know Nick Marsh and Jack Velling are back as targets on this Michigan State team. They could really step up. Ryan Brown is a guy very fun to watch. Remember last year how he was making plays in that Illinois game, and they nearly found a way to pull that upset last year. I know Barry Odom and that squad, they got a lot of work to do certainly at Purdue, but this is one where it's he's a redshirt sophomore. He played a little bit last year, so I guess you could kind of put him in somehow into the second year category as well. I think out of all of these guys, Aiden Childs, Dylan Raiola, Damon Williams are ones that I think could really step up and be in that top 5, top 6, top 7 type of category this season. One of these guys, at least one of these guys is going to break out and have a really, really good season. Those are 3 guys that I think could possibly answer the question. And then we got transfer portal guys. Which will a transfer portal quarterback flex their team's portal power? A third of Big Ten starting quarterbacks are slated to be transfer guys. Mark Gronowski at Iowa, Billy Edwards at Wisconsin, Nico Maliava over there at UCLA. You got Preston Stone at Northwestern. You've got Justin Martin at Maryland. You've got Fernando Mendoza over there at Indiana. You've got a lot of these guys certainly in there. I out of all of these guys, I think there's 2 and then a third that really stand out to me. Fernando Mendoza, I think, is going to have tremendous success at Indiana. When you combine the system, when you combine what's coming back, their leading receiver, Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper's coming back as well. Nobody's really talking about this. Indiana's roster is as good as it was at the very least last year. They've got a more difficult schedule and more difficult games. But like second year of Siggy, I think that this is going to be another really good football team in Bloomington, Indiana. It would not surprise me if Fernando Mendoza really lights it up in this Indiana offense. We saw what the type of jump that Curtis Rourke could certainly make. Boy, I'm really high on Fernando Mendoza and this Indiana offense this year. Mark Gronowski, he's probably the best quarterback Iowa has had since Nate Stanley in 2019. You could see the upward trajectory that this offense was making last year. Now if you have like a guy who's been there, like he's been a winner at South Dakota State, that's all he's done is win. Win. And now you really plug him into this Tim Lester offense. Now the big deal for the Iowa is going to be, can these wide receivers separate on a consistent basis? Can they get open for Marky Mark to be able to make those plays? I think that's going to be the question for him, but I love the direction I think that Iowa is going, and I think they're going to continue to take steps up, certainly, at the quarterback position. And then Nico Maliava over there at UCLA. I think this is going to be a UCLA offense that's going to look to throw. I think they're going to look to throw often. And that's another one of those teams that I think is maybe lying within the weeds. If we get Nico, and I love the combination with Tino Sunseri, formerly of the Indiana Hoosiers, now he's the OC over there in Westwood. I love that combination. I think this is a team that can kind of be a little bit scary and can give a lot of teams fits. I love the fight. I think Deshaun Foster is a really good fit for what UCLA certainly is doing right now. I think there's other guys on this list. Like, I don't think much is going to be expected out of Billy Edwards at Wisconsin. I think that's going to be that team's going to be leaning a little bit more towards the run, which I think is good. It's going to allow Billy to kind of protect the football a little bit better, make easier and simpler decisions as the season goes along as well. Which one of these questions will be answered? Who's going to stand out? Well, unfortunately, we got to wait and see, but let me know your answers to these questions in the comments below, and let's chat it up. Let's have a discussion. Man, we had a lot of good discussion here on today's edition of Big Nation. This one maybe went a little bit longer than anticipated, but hey, that's what we're here for. We're talking an hour plus of Big Ten football in the month of freaking June, and we're not even talking about recruiting. That's why we love it. That's why we love it. So, until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next edition of Big Nation.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.